Hello and welcome. I am glad you are here. Tonight we begin a quiet journey, one that will carry us not only across landscapes of rock and snow, but also across the deep folds of memory and imagination. It is a journey into the story of mountains, those vast shapes rising against the sky, those immovable presences that have watched over valleys, rivers, and generations. Some say mountains are the bones of the earth. Others have imagined them as sleeping giants, being so immense that their slumber appears eternal. But what if that metaphor holds more than poetry? What if, in some sense, mountains really are giants? Not creatures in the way we know life today, not flesh and blood, but beings of stone and pressure, shaped by forces so slow and so vast that they seem almost alive. When we look at a mountain, we are seeing something that has risen and something that will eventually fall. Nothing about it is permanent, though permanence is exactly what it feels like when you stand at its base and tilt your head back. A mountain ridge seems timeless, an unchanging horizon. Yet mountains are among the most restless features of the planet. They rise because continents collide, because plates of crust push against each other with steady, unstoppable pressure. They erode because wind, rain, ice, and rivers patiently carve them down, carrying their dust to plains and seas. They are born, they grow, they crumble, and in their slow rhythm they resemble life cycles on a scale we can hardly comprehend. The thought that mountains might be giants is less about myth than it is about perspective. Imagine something that takes millions of years to breathe in and millions more to breathe out. Imagine a being whose movements are measured not in footsteps but in tectonic shifts. To us it seems still. To Earth, it is alive with motion. In this way, mountains are the slowest giants we know. They do not speak with voices, but their stories are written in the language of stone. Consider the Himalayas. They are still growing, rising as India presses into Asia. The pressure is relentless. Each year, the peaks climb a little higher, though erosion works at them just as tirelessly. The balance between uplift and erosion is what gives mountains their shape. To imagine this is to see mountains not as frozen, but as engaged in a dialogue between creation and destruction. It is a conversation that does not end. One side builds, the other wears away, and what we see is the ever-changing compromise. This process is so vast in time that we rarely notice it, but the mountains notice. They register every earthquake, every landslide, every glacier that carves through their slopes. They hold fossils of ancient seas and corals once alive in warm, shallow waters. They remember climates that shifted, forests that grew and vanished, rivers that carved and recarved valleys. They are, in this sense, archives of deep history, libraries without words but rich with memory. A geologist reads them like pages. A traveler feels them as silence and presence. For as long as humans have lived in their shadows, mountains have been sources of wonder and reverence. Ancient cultures often saw them as sacred places, dwelling sites of gods, ancestors, or spirits. To climb them was to move closer to the heavens. To live near them was to live near power. Even today, standing before a massive range can stir a feeling of awe that borders on reverence. It is not only their height or size, it is the way they seem to look back at you, unblinking, timeless. In myths across the world, mountains are often personified. They walk, they fight, they protect, they slumber. These stories may sound fanciful, but they arise from an intuition. Humans sensed that mountains were not inert. They shifted, they rumbled, they breathed clouds, they exhaled rivers. People gave them the qualities of beings because that was the closest language available to describe something so powerful and yet so beyond comprehension. In this way, the metaphor of mountains as giants has been with us for millennia. And yet, even stripped of myth, the metaphor holds. Geology confirms that mountains are restless, alive in their own slow tempo. When continents crash together, crust buckles, folds, and thrusts upward. The result is a mountain chain, a range that may stretch thousands of kilometers. These ranges rise higher than any human structure could hope to, and their lifespans dwarf our civilizations. The Roman Empire lasted centuries. A mountain range lasts tens of millions of years. From the perspective of mountains, our histories are brief sparks, like campfires glimpsed from the dark slopes. Mountains shape not only landscapes, but also the people who live near them. They control weather, trapping clouds and creating rain shadows. They direct rivers, dictate routes of travel, and provide materials for building. They are obstacles and shelters, guardians and barriers. For many cultures, they define the horizon of the known world. To live in a mountain valley is to live in the embrace of stone giants. To cross mountains is to enter another realm, one of risk and transformation. And when we consider the possibility that mountains are giants, we do not need to think of them as mythical creatures. Instead, we can think of them as the earth itself expressing its vitality. They are the muscles and bones of the planet's slow dance. They are evidence that our world is not static but alive. Every peak, every ridge, every cliff is the result of pressure and motion that continues even now beneath our feet. The ground is always moving, though so slowly we rarely notice. Mountains remind us that stability is an illusion, that the earth itself is a participant in cycles of change. Imagine sitting in silence on a mountainside. You feel the wind, the cool air, the solidity of rock beneath you. It seems still, but deep below, forces are at work. Heat rises from the mantle. Plates creep, pressure builds, faults strain. In the span of your lifetime you may never see the mountain change, but in the span of 1,000 lifetimes the difference would be clear. Peaks would erode, valleys would deepen, rocks would fracture and fall. The mountain you sat upon would be altered, perhaps unrecognizable. In this way, mountains live in a timescale that dwarfs our own. What makes them giants is not their size alone, but their relationship to time. Giants are beings larger than life, beyond ordinary scale. Mountains are exactly that. They extend upward into the sky and downward into the earth, and their lifespans stretch far beyond human memory. They are not immortal, but their mortality is so slow that to us it appears eternal. Their rise and fall are the slow breathing of the planet. And so, as we begin this exploration, let us set aside the distinction between myth and geology. Let us see mountains as both. They are giants in the imagination and in the crust. They are teachers of patience, reminding us that what seems permanent is not, and what seems still is moving. In their presence, we sense both our smallness and our connection to something vast. This is where we begin, with the quiet recognition that mountains, whether imagined as giants or understood as geology, embody a truth that goes beyond words. They show us that the earth is alive in ways too slow for daily perception. They remind us that entrance is always paired with change, and they invite us to look closer, to listen longer, to feel deeper into the rhythms of time that shape both stone and story. Let us look deeper into how mountains are formed, and in that process, see more clearly why some have imagined them as beings of immense and hidden power. Mountains begin with collisions, When one plate of the Earth's crust presses against another, the edges cannot pass smoothly. Instead, the crust folds, fractures, and heaves upward. Over millions of years, what was once seabed or flat land becomes towering ranges. Rocks that formed deep in the earth are thrust upward, exposed to sunlight and weather for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. This is a slow, grinding process. It is not the sudden birth of a creature, but the patient rise of something that feels alive by its very persistence. Imagine a being whose heartbeat takes eons. A mountain's growth is that heartbeat. With each tremor, each shift, its body reshapes. What we see as violent earthquakes are perhaps only the flexing of stone muscles. To us, destruction; to the mountain, movement. The Himalayas, Andes, Alps, Rockies. Each range is a record of these pressures. Their jagged ridges are not accidents. They are expressions of the hidden energy within the planet. The granite cores of ranges, like the Sierra Nevada, stand as evidence of deep magma chambers that cooled and solidified long ago. These crystalline bones now protrude into the sky. They gleam in sunlight as if polished by the ages. To stand among them is to feel the bones of a sleeping giant, and while these giants are built, they are also worn down. Wind carries fine particles from their slopes. Rivers carve canyons, tearing into their flanks and carrying fragments to distant seas. Glaciers scrape and gouge, leaving behind deep valleys and sharp ridges. This cycle of building and erosion continues without pause. Mountains are shaped not only by fire from below, but also by water and ice from above. They are being sculpted simultaneously from inside and outside, just as all living things are shaped by inner growth and external pressures. Consider the strange balance this creates. Mountains rise faster than erosion can cut them down, yet erosion is relentless, always smoothing, always reducing. What remains is never finished. The silhouette of every peak we admire is temporary, a fleeting stage in an endless process. When you look at a mountain, you are seeing it only in its current form, not in its eternal essence. In 1,000 years, the ridges will be altered. In 1,000,000, the shape will be unrecognizable. In 100 million, the range itself may be gone, replaced by plains or seas, while new mountains rise elsewhere. Is this not the rhythm of life, birth, growth, decline, and transformation? The cycle of beings, the cycle of civilizations. Mountains mirror us, only stretched across incomprehensible spans of time. To call them giants is to recognize that their slowness is their life. They are not inanimate. They are living differently. Humans have always sensed this. Ancient myths rarely treated mountains as mere scenery. They were protectors, obstacles, deities. Mount Olympus in Greece, home of gods. Mount Fuji in Japan, sacred to Shinto tradition. Mount Sinai in the deserts, where divine revelation was said to occur. Mountains drew worship because they seemed closer to heaven, and because their presence felt more than physical. Their size suggested will, their immobility suggested endurance. People bowed to mountains as they bowed to rulers and spirits. It was respect for power, but also recognition of a kind of personality within the stone. Even in secular times, we feel it. Climbers describe mountains as if they have moods. Some days they are welcoming, clear skies, steady roots. Other days they are hostile, storms raging, avalanche thundering. Climbers prepare, but they also ask permission, as if the mountain chooses who may stand on its summit. The idea that mountains grant or deny entry is not rational, but it persists because the feeling is real. When you face a mountain, You feel judged by something beyond yourself. You feel measured. If we follow this line of thought, mountains can be seen as slow witnesses of history. Imagine a giant who has stood in silence for tens of millions of years. Imagine what it has seen. The rise of forests, the march of glaciers, the passing of countless species, perhaps even the first humans, small figures crossing valleys, looking up in awe at peaks they could not hope to conquer. The mountain has seen it all, and it does not move. Its memories written in strata, in fossils embedded in stone. Its gaze is unbroken, stretching across ages. And what of those fossils? Within mountain rocks, we find shells, corals, and marine creatures. Evidence that what is now high above the sea was once ocean floor. These reminders are startling. A giant carries in its body the bones of creatures that lived in warm waters hundreds of millions of years ago. The summit of Everest itself is composed of marine limestone, filled with the remains of tiny sea life. What could make the metaphor of a giant more powerful than this? Mountains hold multitudes within them. They are not only beings of stone, but beings filled with the memories of other lives. Mountains also shape human destiny. They dictate routes of migration, trade, and conquest. Entire civilizations have been defined by their relationship with mountain ranges. The Inca built their empire in the Andes, mastering terraced farming along steep slopes. The people of Tibet shaped their culture in the thin air of the Himalayas. European history is filled with tales of armies struggling through the Alps. Mountains determine who meets and who remains apart. They form boundaries not only on maps but in minds. They also hold resources, metals, minerals, fresh water from glaciers. These gifts sustain life, but also create conflict. The mining of mountains has fueled civilizations and destroyed landscapes. To take from a mountain is to wound a giant. And yet, mountains are resilient, enduring long after human extraction has ended. They remind us that our interventions are temporary scratches upon their bodies, which heal in time spans far beyond ours. And what of their silence? Mountains rarely speak in ways we notice. A landslide, a rumble of rockfall, a sudden avalanche. These are their moments of voice, and they are powerful. But mostly they stand silent, immobile. It is in that silence that humans project meaning. We hear the silence as solemn, as sacred. We feel watched, though no eyes are there. We sense presence, though no body stirs. Mountains evoke this because their scale overwhelms us. They remind us of our limits. Perhaps the reason myths describe them as giants is because humans needed to translate that feeling into story. To say the mountain is a god or the mountain is a giant is a way of admitting that something more than rock is happening here. It is an acknowledgement of awe. Even if we now explain mountains with geology, the awe remains. The science does not erase the myth. Instead, the science deepens it. To know that Everest was once under a shallow sea makes the mountain more mysterious, not less. To know that continents move and ranges rise is to realize the earth itself is alive. So we return to the question: what if mountains were once giants? Perhaps they still are. Giants of time, giants of memory, giants of stone. Beings that rise slowly and fall slowly, whose bodies shape weather, rivers, and lives. Beings that remind us that permanence is an illusion and that everything is part of a cycle. Giants who do not need to walk because their stillness is movement. Giants who do not need to speak because their silence is voice. To walk among mountains is to walk among these beings, to feel small, yet included in their story. To listen for a heartbeat that takes millions of years to sound, and in that listening, to understand that the earth itself is alive, that we live not only on it, but within its breathing body. Mountains are not background, they are characters in the great unfolding of the planet. And whether or not we name them giants, they live as presences that shape us in ways we may never fully comprehend. If mountains are giants, then myths are the language in which we have tried to speak with them. Across cultures and continents, stories about mountains echo with remarkable similarity. They are guardians, ancestors, places where heaven and earth meet. The universality of these tales suggests that humanity, regardless of geography, has always felt the same silent pull when gazing up at immense peaks. In Norse mythology, the very bones of the world were thought to be the remains of a giant named Ymir. After the gods slew him, his flesh became the earth, his skull the sky, and his bones the mountains. In this vision, every peak and ridge, literally the body of a giant, broken yet eternal. The earth is not built on stone, but on memory, the remnants of a being so vast it had to be divided to create space for everything else. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, many indigenous nations tell stories of great battles between sky beings and mountain beings. The Cascade Range is dotted with peaks named after these stories. Mount St. Helens, for example, was once called Lualaclough, a fiery woman who battled other peaks for the love of a chief. When volcanic eruptions split mountains and reshaped valleys, these were not random events, but struggles between living entities, giants whose passions scarred the earth. The Greeks, too, placed giants in their mountains. The Gigantomachy, the great war between gods and giants, ended with many of the defeated giants trapped beneath mountains. Their struggles were said to cause earthquakes and eruptions. Etna in Sicily, for instance, was believed to imprison the giant Typhon, whose breath fueled volcanic fire. In this telling, mountains are not simply bodies, but prisons, holding immense power that sometimes escapes in bursts of destruction. The Himalayas were seen in Hindu traditions as the home of deities, especially Shiva, who dwelled on Mount Kailash. But beyond the divine, there is also the sense of the mountain itself as a living being. Kailash is considered so sacred that climbing its summit is forbidden. To walk around it in pilgrimage is the proper gesture. The mountain's presence is not to be conquered, but honored. Giants do not need us to stand on their heads, they ask only recognition. Even in more recent cultural memory, the language of mountains retains this living quality. Romantic poets described mountains as sublime, not merely beautiful, but overwhelming, capable of inspiring fear and awe at the same time. Percy Shelley wrote of Mont Blanc, if it were a voice of eternity itself. John Muir, the naturalist, called mountains fountains of life. They were not only scenery to him, but beings that refreshed the spirit, healed the body, and instructed the mind. His reverence echoes ancient myths, only translated into the language of ecology and wonder. And what do myths accomplish here? They make the incomprehensible graspable. To live near a volcano and hear its thunder without myth would be terror. To know that it is a giant shifting in anger transforms fear into story. It offers a framework for coexistence. To climb a high ridge and see the world spread below without myth is disorientation. To believe that the ridge is the shoulder of a giant gives meaning to perspective. The mountain is no longer indifferent. It is a presence with whom we share existence. The persistence of mountain myths reveals something profound about human psychology. We are not content to live surrounded by vastness without explanation. We need relationship. Mountains became giants, not because anyone mistook stone for flesh, but because people needed to enter into dialogue with them. Myths were a way of saying, "We see you, we feel you, we recognize your power." And perhaps this is why the metaphor of giants has never left us. Even when geology replaced mythology, the language of all remained. We may say tectonic plates instead of battling titans, but the imagery of giants still lingers beneath. When scientists describe mountains rising, colliding, and eroding, the words echo the motions of beings. We cannot help but humanize them, even in data. Our metaphors betray us, because we sense something alive in stone. Consider also the role of mountains in shaping memory. They anchor stories across generations. A valley tribe may tell tales of their origin at a certain peak. Pilgrimages may be taken to a ridge where ancestors are believed to have spoken with spirits. Even modern nations choose mountains as symbols, placing them on flags, coins, and emblems. Switzerland's identity is tied to the Alps, Japan's to Fuji, Nepal's to Everest. A giant is not only a landscape feature, it becomes a character in the story of a people. The permanence of mountains makes them natural monuments. They do not crumble like temples, nor vanish like cities. They endure, and so they can carry meaning for millennia. In them, cultures inscribe memory. The Inca carved shrines into Andean peaks. Buddhist monasteries cling to Himalayan cliffs. Christian crosses crown alpine summits. These acts are not random. They are ways of acknowledging the living giant by placing human signs upon it. But even here, the mountain is greater. Long after monasteries crumble and crosses fall, the peak will remain. The giant holds memory, but it also outlives it. Now imagine again the fossils embedded in mountain rock. Each fossil is itself a memory, a moment of life preserved by chance. To find a seashell atop a mountain is to confront time in its vastest form. Here, myth and science converge. The myth says, "This giant was once an ocean." The science says, "This limestone was laid down by marine creatures hundreds of millions of years ago before tectonic forces lifted it skyward." Both explanations acknowledge transformation. Both affirm that what looks eternal, actually fluid. Mountains change, giants grow old. But unlike us, their lifespans stretch beyond imagination. To think of a mountain as a giant is to glimpse eternity. It is to understand that our few decades are as nothing compared to its eons. Yet in that comparison, there is also comfort. If mountains are giants, then we are children among them. Our struggles and triumphs may seem small, but they are not meaningless. The giants do not mock us, they shelter us, feed us, inspire us. They remind us that life is larger than any single being. Mountains also invite humility. In their presence, human pride dissolves. Cities may rise, empires may fall, but the mountains endure. Kings and conquerors pass, but the peaks remain unmoved. To think of them as giants is to acknowledge forces beyond control. They do not bow to us, we bow to them. Even when we climb their slopes, plant flags, or tunnel through their bases, the giants remain unshaken. Our victories are temporary scratches. The giant's body remains, indifferent to our claims. And yet, mountains are not cruel. They do not seek to destroy, they simply are. When avalanches sweep away villages or eruptions bury towns, it is not malice, but movement. The giant shifts, and we happen to be in the way. Recognizing mountains as giants is thus a way of understanding both danger and generosity. They can kill, but they also give life. Rivers born from glaciers irrigate fields, minerals sustain economies. The soil of valleys, enriched by mountain erosion, grows crops. Giants are givers as much as they are takers, so the metaphor endures. because it holds truth. Mountains are giants in memory, giants in myth, giants in time. They embody the paradox of power and patience, silence and voice, destruction and gift. To live near them is to live near beings who remind us constantly of scale. They are the measure against which our lives feel small, but also meaningful. The next time one gazes at a peak rising above the clouds, it is worth pausing to remember not only the geology that shaped it, but also the myths that surrounded it. Both are ways of telling the same story. Both admit that in stone there is presence. Both say, these are not mere rocks, these are giants. When we stand before a mountain, it is tempting to imagine permanence. The sheer scale, the jagged outline against the horizon, the sense that such a form has always been, and will always be, creates an illusion of immovability. Yet geology teaches something else. Mountains are in motion, though so slowly that human eyes cannot see it. They are not statues, they are processes. Unlike all processes, they have beginnings, middles, and ends. Giants too, however vast, are mortal in their own way. To understand this, let us picture erosion as the quiet hand of time. Rain falls, freezes, and melts in the cracks of rock. Each freeze expands, each thaw relaxes, each cycle pries the stone apart by fractions of millimeters. Over centuries, those fractions become boulders tumbling down slopes. Rivers carve valleys, carrying sediment from high places to low. Glaciers, massive rivers of ice, grind mountains down like slow, relentless sculptors. The highest peaks are shaved and reshaped, the sharp ridges softened into rolling hills, then into plains. Consider the Appalachians of eastern North America. Today they appear as long, forested ridges, beautiful but not towering. Few peaks rise above 2,000 meters. Yet hundreds of millions of years ago, they rivaled the Himalayas in height. They were once giants among giants, sharp and snowbound. But time has humbled them. Rain, frost, and gravity wore them down. What we walk upon now is the weathered skeleton of what was. The Appalachians remind us that mountains, like all things, age. They may take hundreds of millions of years to do so, but the trajectory is set. Giants eventually stoop, crumble, and sink into memory. The process is not uniform. Some mountains collapse quickly under heavy rainfall or active glaciers. Others, in arid climates, hold their shapes longer, their rock exposed but less weathered. Volcanic peaks can rise in a matter of years, erupting from flat ground into cones thousands of meters high. Yet they too erode, their slopes weakened by ash and lava flows. Mount Fuji in Japan, iconic in its symmetry, is young in geological terms. Its beauty is the freshness of youth. One day, it too will soften. Even Everest, the highest point on Earth, is not immune. Winds scour its slopes, avalanches reshape its flanks. The glaciers that drape its sides are retreating, carving as they melt. The giant grows not only upward from tectonic collision, but downward from erosion. It is both ascending and collapsing at once, in a delicate balance of forces. The giant's growth is inseparable from its decline. This recognition changes how we think of permanence. Mountains give the impression of eternity, yet they embody impermanence at a scale we struggle to perceive. Human lifespans are so brief compared to their cycles that we mistake stillness for immutability. But if we could speed time as if turning the dial on a projector, we would see mountains ripple and collapse like waves on the ocean. Giants do not stand forever. They rise, bow, and fall like all living forms. There is also a poignancy here. The idea that even the tallest mountains will one day be gone is humbling. It places humanity's achievements in perspective. Cities may rise and fall in centuries, empires in millennia, but mountains measure time in tens or hundreds of millions of years. And yet, in the end, the giants also fade. The Appalachian ridges tell us that the Himalayas, however mighty, will one day lie low and quiet. Giants are not immortal. What remains after their fall, equally profound. The sediment carried away from mountains does not vanish, it builds new land. Deltas form where rivers meet the sea, nourished by mountain stone ground to silt. Fertile plains stretch across continents, their richness drawn from eroded peaks. The Nile Valley, lifeline of Egypt, owes its soil to distant highlands. The Ganges Plain, cradle of civilizations, is fed by Himalayan erosion. In this way, mountains give life long after they cease to tower. Giants feed generations beyond number by surrendering their bodies to the lowlands. It is no accident that the oldest agricultural civilizations arose in river valleys fed by mountain erosion. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China's Yellow River Basin all depended on silt carried from highlands. The giants were silent partners in the birth of human society. Without their erosion, there would have been no fertile fields to till, no surpluses to sustain cities, no civilizations to flourish. The giants, while falling, nourish life. This duality destruction that gives life is central to mountains as giants. They crush and they create. Landslides bury villages, yet their sediment enriches soils downstream. Volcanic eruptions obliterate landscapes, yet the ash fertilizes future growth. Glacial grinding levels valleys, yet leaves behind fresh ground for forests and fields. Giants fall not into nothingness, but into transformation. Their death is not an end, but a dispersal of gifts. Humans, perhaps unconsciously, have always recognized this. The reverence paid to mountains is not only for their height, but also for their generosity. In myth, giants are often dangerous yet life-giving. They may hoard treasure, but also guard springs of water. They may block paths, but also create valleys. In geology, the metaphor is literal. Mountains are sources of rivers, soils, and minerals. To call them giants is to acknowledge both fear and gratitude. But mountains also test us. To live near them is to live with risk. Avalanche sweep slopes without warning. Earthquakes, born of the same tectonic forces that raise peaks, can devastate cities. Volcanic eruptions, spectacular in their violence, remind us that giants are not tame. Those who dwell in mountain shadows learn resilience. They build terraces, plant crops adapted to thin air, and develop cultures shaped by hardship and beauty alike. Entire identities form in the presence of giants. The Andes gave rise to the Inca, the Himalayas to Tibetan Buddhism, the Alps to Swiss culture. The mountains challenge and protect, shaping people as much as people shape them. When we reflect on this, we see that giants are teachers. They teach patience because their movements are slow. They teach humility because their scale dwarfs us. They teach resilience because their dangers force adaptation. And they teach generosity because their erosion feeds the plains where civilizations grow. The metaphor is not merely poetic, it captures truths of geology, ecology, and human culture. Even silence is a lesson. In mountain valleys, far from cities, one feels the weight of quiet. The absence of human noise reveals other rhythms, the crack of ice, the rush of water, the whisper of wind against stone. Giants speak, but slowly. Their voices are in echoes and avalanches, in rivers and rockfalls. To hear them requires stillness. To understand them requires time. Modern science, for all its data and precision, has not replaced the sense of giants. It has only deepened it. We now know mountains are built by plates sliding, colliding, and diving beneath each other. We can measure their growth in millimeters per year. We can trace their erosion through isotopes in sediment. Yet even as we quantify, the feeling of presence remains. The Himalayas are not diminished by knowing they rise at 5 millimeters per year. They are magnified. To think that such slow motion can produce such immensity is awe-inspiring. It is a giant's pace, not ours. So when we stand on a ridge and look across ranges that stretch to the horizon, we are looking at lives in progress. We are witnessing giants mid-breath, their peaks are bones, their glaciers veins, their rivers lifeblood. They rise, they fall, they feed, they destroy. They embody cycles larger than any human story. And by recognizing this, we find our place not at the center, but within the circle of transformation. The giants remind us that impermanence is not loss but process. To know that mountains fall not to despair but to marvel, for in their falling, they give life. In their silence, they teach. In their immensity, they humble. And in their myths, they live not only as stone, but as beings woven into the fabric of our imagination. Mountains have always occupied a peculiar space in human imagination. They are too large to ignore, too formidable to conquer without consequence, and too mysterious to fully explain until very recently in history. Because of this, people across cultures have approached them not just as landscapes, but as presences. To live beside a mountain is to live beside something greater, and often, people responded by weaving reverence into their daily lives. Think first of pilgrimage. Mountains have long been destinations not for conquest, but for devotion. Mount Kailash in Tibet, sacred to Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Bon practitioners, is never climbed, but circled in reverence. Pilgrims walk the long path around its base, sometimes taking weeks, bowing or prostrating themselves at every step. The journey is not about reaching the summit, but about acknowledging the mountain's presence as a living being. A giant does not need to be scaled, it needs to be respected. Mount Fuji in Japan holds similar reverence. Though climbed today by thousands of visitors each year, for centuries it was a site of worship. Shrines at its base and along its slopes honor the mountain spirit, believed to embody both danger and blessing. Fuji's perfect cone, visible from great distances, shaped poetry, paintings, and the rhythms of devotion. Even now, it appears on currency, art, and cultural symbols. The giant is not just scenery, it is identity itself. In the Andes, the concept of apus describes mountain spirits that watch over valleys and villages. Each community traditionally offers rituals to its local apu, giving food, coca leaves, or chicha beer, asking for protection in return. The apis are not abstract deities, they are the mountains themselves, seen as beings with personalities and powers. Some are kind, some stern, some quick to anger. To live in their shadow is to live in relationship, a dialogue carried across generations. European traditions also reveal this reverence. In the Alps, mountains were once viewed as dangerous, haunted places. Medieval travelers described them as homes of dragons, spirits, or demons. Only gradually, during the Renaissance and Enlightenment, did Europeans begin to celebrate mountains for their beauty. Yet even then, the sense of awe remained. The Romantic poets spoke of mountains as sublime, overwhelming, capable of stirring the deepest emotions. William Wordsworth, gazing upon the Lake District peaks, wrote of a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. The giant had shifted from menace to muse, but it remained a being larger than human life. It is telling that mountains are often seen as the homes of gods. Mount Olympus in Greece was said to house Zeus and his kin. Mount Sinai in the Hebrew tradition was where Moses received the commandments. In Mesoamerica, volcanoes were linked to deities of fire and fertility. The summit is not just higher ground. It is a bridge between earth and sky, a place where humans can glimpse the divine. To climb too high was often taboo, a trespass into sacred space. The giant's head is not for mortal feet, but mountains also became stages for ritual. The Inca, for instance, conducted ceremonies on Andean summits, leaving offerings of textiles, figurines, and even human sacrifices. Archaeological discoveries reveal shrines built thousands of meters above sea level, where the thin air makes survival itself a challenge. Why make such journeys? Because to reach the summit was to speak directly to the Apu, to meet the giant face to face. The danger and difficulty of the climb made the offering all the more potent. The stories of giants, too, reflect how humans internalized mountains. Across cultures, myths describe mountains as slumbering beings, their shaking as earthquakes, their eruptions as anger, their stillness as patience. In Icelandic sagas, trolls turned to stone at dawn, becoming mountains themselves. In Norse tales, giants battled gods, their bodies scattered across the land. In Bori traditions, mountains like Taranaki and Tongariro are described as beings who fought over the love of a maiden, their movements carving rivers and valleys. These are not just tales, they are ways of understanding landscapes that shift and breathe, slowly but perceptibly. Such myths reveal an important truth. Humans have always sensed motion in mountains. Even before geology explained plate tectonics, people saw peaks as restless. A landslide was a giant stirring in its sleep. A rumble was its growl. Smoke rising from a volcano was its breath. Myth provided the vocabulary for forces that science would later name. In both cases, the giants were recognized as active participants in the world. This sense of participation shaped culture beyond myth. Architecture often echoed mountains. Pyramids in Egypt and Mesoamerica, ziggurats in Mesopotamia, even step temples in Asia, all mimic the form of a mountain. They rise above plains, artificial peaks meant to replicate the connection between earth and sky. If natural mountains were too distant or dangerous, humans built their own. To climb a ziggurat was to ascend a miniature Olympus, to stand nearer the divine. The imitation suggests not rivalry, but aspiration. Humans saw mountains as the ultimate model of presence and sought to echo them. Art also reflected the same reverence. Chinese landscape paintings often feature mountains as dominant forms, towering above rivers and trees. They are depicted not only for their beauty, but for their symbolism, stability, eternity, and harmony between heaven and earth. Mountains dominate the frame because they dominate thought. They are the backbone of the world, the giants holding it in balance. Even today, the language we use carries echoes of this reverence. We speak of mountainous tasks, of giant steps, of summit meetings where leaders gather at the metaphorical peak of decision. Mountains remain symbols of difficulty, achievement, and greatness. To reach the top is to succeed. To be dwarfed is to be humbled. Our metaphors betray a memory of giants even when we speak of politics, business, or personal challenge. It is important to notice, however, that reverence does not mean tameness. Humans feared mountains even though they honored them. Avalanches, storms, and eruptions could kill without warning. Travel through mountain passes was treacherous. Many saw peaks not as welcoming deities, but as barriers to cross with caution. The Alps were once dreaded obstacles to traders and armies alike. Hannibal's crossing with elephants became legendary precisely because it seemed impossible. The giants resisted intrusion. This ambivalence, fear, and reverence intertwined shaped human imagination in lasting ways. Mountains could be teachers of resilience, but also reminders of mortality. They could inspire worship, but also demand sacrifice. They were both protectors and threats. In this duality, they mirror the giants of myth, beings immense and unpredictable, neither wholly benevolent nor wholly hostile. Geology, again, confirms the wisdom embedded in myth. Mountains are indeed both life-giving and life-taking. They produce rivers but unleash floods. They harbor minerals but trigger landslides. They shield valleys but provoke earthquakes. The complexity of their role defies simple categorization. Myths captured this by presenting mountains as characters, unpredictable and powerful. Modern science, for all its equations, affirms the same unpredictability. The giants are not easily tamed. In the end, what stands out is how deeply mountains shape the rhythms of life. Myths, rituals, architecture, art, and metaphors all show that mountains were never neutral. They were presences woven into the heart of culture. They defined borders, provided resources, and inspired reverence. They were giants not only in stone but in imagination. To think of mountains this way is to realize that their role in human history is not passive. They are not backdrops against which our dramas unfold. They are actors, shaping societies, influencing choices, demanding responses. They shaped where people settled, how they traveled, what they feared, and what they revered. Giants do not merely watch, they participate. And as we reflect on this, we see a continuity between past and present. Whether through myth or science, through ritual or climbing expeditions, humans continue to respond to mountains as if they are more than stone. Our relationship to them remains a dialogue, carried across millennia, evolving but never broken. The giants endure, and so does our need to see them as beings larger than ourselves. If we step closer to the mountain, not with our eyes lifted toward its peak, but with our hands against its stone, we begin to notice something remarkable. A mountain is not only an immense wall of rock rising above the land, it is also a layered archive. Each stratum tells a story. Each fold preserves a record of what came before. Mountains are not only presences, they are memory itself. Consider a slab of limestone pried from the side of a peak. At first glance it is dull and grey, yet within it, the careful eye may spot a shell, or the delicate outline of coral, or even the imprint of a fish. These are fossils, remnants of life that once thrived in ancient seas. To find them high upon a mountain is to confront an astonishing truth. This stone was once beneath the waves. The summit where clouds gather was once the floor of an ocean. What is now towering height was once deep abyss. This is the paradox of mountains. They rise not from emptiness, but from ancient matter. They carry the memory of vanished worlds within their bodies. To climb a mountain is, in a way, to ascend through time. Each layer takes us further back into history, not only human but planetary. Fossils of ammonites, trilobites, brachiopods, and even primitive algae lie locked in stone thousands of meters above sea level. The giants carry oceans upon their shoulders. Geologists confirm this through the study of orogeny, the process by which mountains are born. Tectonic plates collide, one sliding beneath another, pushing sediments upward. In these collisions, seabeds are lifted, folded, and thrust skyward. Entire marine ecosystems become mountain ranges. The Himalayas, for instance, contain vast deposits of limestone and shale filled with marine fossils, reminders that before they towered above the clouds, these peaks lay beneath the Tethys Ocean. The highest mountains on Earth were once the lowest depths. Giants are born of inversion. But mountains record more than oceans. They preserve climates. Within their layers lie traces of ancient forests, pollen grains fossilized in sediments, coal seams form from swampy vegetation. In certain ranges, tree imprints still appear etched into stone, their patterns as clear as if the bark had pressed itself yesterday. These records reveal not only what grew, but what the air was like, what temperatures prevailed, what rains fell. To read a mountain is to read a climate diary stretching millions of years. The Alps provide such a record. Their rocks preserve evidence of tropical seas, coral reefs, and warm lagoons that existed long before glaciers carved the valleys we see today. The contrast is striking. Where today snowfields gleam, once palm-like plants swayed. The Alps carry not just height, but memory of warmth. They remind us that climates shift, that what seems eternal is not fixed. The giant is not only stone, it is history written in strata. In the Andes, too, records abound. Volcanic deposits reveal eruptions stretching back through ages, each layer a signature of fire. Ash beds tell of explosive events that once darkened skies, altering ecosystems for decades. To the human eye, a mountain may look calm, but within its body, the archive shows restless cycles of violence and renewal. The giant may be still today, but its story is one of fire, collapse, and rebirth. Mountains also contain minerals, each with its own tale. Quartz veins trace the pathways of ancient fluids. Gold, silver, and copper speak of chemical processes deep within the crust. Coal seams tell of dense vegetation buried and transformed. These are not merely resources for human use. They are signatures of the planet's inner workings. Each glimmer of ore, each seam of fuel, is a line in the mountain's memoir. The giant writes not with ink, but with minerals. Yet perhaps most astonishing is the way mountains record motion. Their folds and fractures show how Earth's crust bends and breaks. Geologists read these lines as one might read wrinkles on a face. Each fold reveals compression, each fault shows release. The angles of strata, the tilt of layers, the sharp thrust of cliffs all whisper of collisions that occurred at scales beyond human comprehension. To look at a mountain's ridges is to glimpse frozen movement, like waves caught in mid-crest. Giants may seem still, but they are frozen in the act of rising. Sometimes the archive holds sudden drama. In the Himalayas, scientists have found evidence of earthquakes stretching back thousands of years. Landslides preserved in sediments reveal where entire slopes collapsed in a single instant. These events, though catastrophic, become etched into the mountain's memory. Even disasters are recorded, woven into the giant's layers. What makes this even more humbling is how much patience such archives demand. Fossils do not form in days. Strata do not bend in years. Coal does not emerge in centuries. These processes span millions of years, requiring time so vast that human history barely registers. To read a mountain is to confront scales of time that dwarf empires, languages, and civilizations. The giant's memory is measured not in centuries but in eons. This is why some cultures speak of mountains as timekeepers. They rise slowly, age slowly, erode slowly, and yet carry within them the swift flashes of catastrophe. Their faces bear both the marks of patience and the scars of violence. To meditate upon a mountain is to sense time itself, not as an abstraction, but as a presence embodied in stone. Standing at the base of a range, we may notice how valleys carve into slopes, exposing layer after layer. Each cut reveals another chapter. Glaciers, rivers, unwinds act like archivists, opening the giant's pages for us to read. Without erosion, much would remain hidden, but as stone crumbles, memory surfaces. The mountain gives itself to those who watch with care. Geologists often describe mountains as open books, yet perhaps a better image is that of a library. Each peak is a shelf, each layer a volume, each fossil a page. The difficulty lies not in the abundance of memory, but in its patience. The library waits in silence, offering its volumes only to those willing to linger. Giants do not shout their stories, they murmur them across millennia. This perspective also changes how we view our own place. Human history may seem long to us, but compared to the archive of a mountain, it is scarcely a footnote. The oldest known city walls are but a few thousand years old. The oldest written text barely 4,000. Yet the mountain has held its fossils for hundreds of millions. Its folds remember seas that vanished before mammals even appeared. The giant has witnessed not just humanity, but countless worlds that came and went. To realize this is not to diminish our story, but to place it within a grander one. Mountains remind us that we are part of a continuum far older and larger than ourselves. Our achievements, struggles, and dreams take place in the shadow of beings whose memories stretch beyond imagination. The giant carries us as it carried oceans, forests, and glaciers. We are one layer among many, and perhaps this is why mountains inspire humility. Their archives reveal both the impermanence of what we build and the endurance of the earth itself. To stand before a peak and know that it once lay beneath the sea is to accept that change is constant. To touch a fossil high above the tree line is to feel the ocean where no waves remain. The giant's memory reshapes our sense of permanence, yet there is a quiet gift here too. By reading mountains, we glimpse not only the past, but possible futures. Climate records locked in stone, how Earth has warmed and cooled, how ecosystems have shifted, how oceans have risen and fallen. These patterns remind us that the present climate crisis, though alarming, fits within cycles far older than us. The mountain does not erase our responsibility, but it shows us context. It whispers that the earth has changed before, and it will change again. Giants endure even as climates shift. In the end, to think of mountains as archives is to realize they are not only physical presences, but also teachers. They show us patience, resilience, and perspective. They remind us that memory is not only held in human minds, but in stone. And they invite us to listen, to place our ears to the rock and hear the murmur of time itself. The giant is not silent after all. It speaks. If only we learn to read its language. If one lesson stands out when we dwell on mountains, it is the lesson of silence. Mountains do not hurry, they do not shout, and yet their presence is impossible to ignore. They loom without moving. They influence rivers, winds, and skies without uttering a sound. In their stillness, they remind us that power need not be loud, and that time itself is best measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of stone. Climbers and wanderers often remark upon this silence. Standing high above valleys, one hears not the bustle of human life, but the soft hiss of wind across rock, the faint call of a bird carried far below, or perhaps nothing at all. This quiet is not emptiness, but fullness. It carries the weight of ages. It is the pause after mountains have spoken their truths, a pause so long it becomes indistinguishable from eternity. And yet this silence is deceptive. Mountains are not still in the way a statue is still. They are alive in the scale of geological time. Even as we stand upon them, they are rising or eroding, moving imperceptibly under the influence of tectonic shifts and weather. What appears to be perfect stillness is actually motion too slow for human senses to catch. It is like listening to music played at such a glacial tempo that only millennia reveal the tune. To sense this is to feel humility. We are creatures tuned to hours and days, yet mountains measure in millions of years. Where we see permanence, they see fleeting change. Where we marvel at longevity, they mark only a moment. The silence of mountains is not the absence of sound, but the presence of a rhythm so deep and slow that our senses cannot perceive it. Consider the Himalayas, rising as the Indian plate collides with the Eurasian plate. They continue to grow by a few millimeters each year. This is motion beyond the grasp of our daily awareness. It is like watching a seed grow, except slowed 1,000-fold. Yet in time, the difference becomes undeniable. Today, Everest stands as the tallest peak above sea level. But millions of years ago, it was not so, and millions of years hence, it may not be again. The giant rises quietly, inch by inch, its silence filled with purpose. The Andes, too, are not immobile but restless. Volcanic eruptions shape their ridges, while glaciers carve their valleys. And all the while, the range is being pushed upward by the relentless energy of plate tectonics. To us, these shifts appear sudden only in their eruptions or quakes. But in truth, they are the continuation of a long, slow story, one written in patience. Silence, then, is not emptiness but scale. It is what happens when motion stretches so far across time that it transcends our ability to sense it. The mountain's silence is the silence of a being who thinks in eons rather than years, in continents rather than borders. Giants live at such scales, and in their quietness lies their wisdom. Another lesson the mountains teach is scale itself. To gaze upon them is to feel small, yet not in despair. Rather, their immensity places us within the fabric of something greater. They reveal our size not as a flaw but as a truth. We are brief, we are light. We are threads woven into a vast tapestry of stone and air. The Alps provide such perspective. From the valleys, peaks soar like guardians, their snowy crowns brushing the sky. Villages and towns seem like toys scattered at their feet. To walk through such terrain is to realize how short human achievements stand beside stone shaped by glaciers thousands of years ago. Cathedrals and castles fade into modesty when compared to ridges that have stood since before human thought existed. The giant scale does not diminish us, it situates us. It shows us our true dimension in the cosmos. There is also a gentleness to this lesson. Though mountains dwarf us, they do not seek to overwhelm. They stand as reminders, not punishments. Their enormity invites reflection. In their presence, people often feel a slowing of thought, a release from urgency. The mountain does not rush, and so neither must we. The giant encourages patience by its very being. This patience extends to how mountains shape the land. Glaciers, creeping slowly down slopes, carve valleys that will endure for tens of thousands of years. Rivers, over countless centuries, slice canyons into solid rock. The Colorado River has spent millions of years carving the Grand Canyon, and it will continue for millions more. To us, this is an eternity, To the mountain, it is merely a process, inevitable and unhurried. Giants endure because they accept the slowness of time. Silence, scale, and patience also extend into how humans interact with mountains. For thousands of years, people have journeyed into their heights seeking solitude, clarity, or transcendence. Pilgrims climb peaks, not simply to reach a summit, but to enter into the presence of something beyond comprehension. Silence becomes sacred, scale becomes humbling, and patience becomes a lesson. Whether in the monasteries perched on cliffs of Tibet, the temples hidden in Himalayan passes, or the sacred peaks revered by indigenous peoples of the Andes, mountains have long been teachers of stillness and endurance. And yet there is another side to this. Mountains, with their silence and scale, can also become dangerous. Their patience does not align with ours, and sometimes their power overwhelms. Avalanches sweep away entire paths in seconds. Rock falls thunder into valleys without warning. To us, these events seem sudden and violent, but to the mountain, they are part of its slow breathing. The giant shifts its weight, and the land responds. It is not cruelty, but rhythm. The lesson is that power does not always align with human expectation. To live near mountains is to accept this dual truth. They inspire with beauty, yet demand respect. Their silence soothes, yet conceals potential for sudden force. Their scale humbles, yet requires adaptation. Civilizations that dwell at their feet learn to live with both awe and caution. Paths are carved carefully. Settlements are built with awareness of slopes and streams. Festivals and myths grow around the peaks, not merely as decoration, but as a form of recognition. To honor the mountain is also to survive beside it. When we view mountains as giants, this duality makes sense. Giants are not merely gentle or harsh, they are both. They embody patience and power, silence and movement, protection and danger. Their wisdom lies in their totality, not in their comfort alone. Perhaps this is why mountains appear so often in human stories. From Mount Olympus to Mount Sinai, from the peaks of the Andes to the ranges of Japan, they are depicted as homes of gods, spirits, or ancestors. Even when stripped of myth, the symbolism endures. We instinctively see mountains as places where the ordinary world fades and something greater begins. Their silence invites reverence, their scale commands respect, their patience whispers of eternity. This perspective reshapes how we might live today. In an age where speed dominates, where messages travel in seconds and decisions are made in minutes, the mountain remains indifferent. It teaches slowness, reminding us that not all change is instant. Growth can be incremental, almost invisible, yet still profound. A peak rising by millimeters each year eventually becomes the tallest in the world. A river carving rock grain by grain eventually creates a canyon of breathtaking scale. Patience is not weakness but endurance. Giants endure because they do not hurry. The silence of mountains also contrasts with the noise of modern life. Our cities buzz with engines, conversations, and endless signals. Our minds echo with to-do lists and obligations. To step into the presence of a mountain is to be reminded that silence is not emptiness, but fullness. It is the space in which thought can stretch, where perspective widens, where gratitude grows. The giant does not speak in words, yet it speaks clearly to those willing to listen. And scale, finally, teaches humility. Mountains remind us that human endeavors, however vast they may seem to us, are small in comparison to the rhythms of the earth. Empires rise and fall, yet peaks remain. Technologies come and go, yet glaciers carve. Our scale is not the center of the story, but one layer among many. To know this is not to despair, but to recognize belonging. We are not above the world. We are within it, as much a part of the mountain's archive as of the fossils pressed into its stone. Silence, patience, and scale, three qualities that mountains embody and share. Three lessons that giants offer freely to those who pause long enough to hear them. To imagine mountains as giants is not to indulge in fantasy, but to recognize qualities already there. They are vast presences, older than our kind, patient beyond our imagination, silent yet filled with meaning. To dwell with them is to learn not only about geology, but about life itself. The mountain as giant is not myth alone, it is metaphor made real. Giants exist in stone, in silence, in scale. They walk slowly, and their steps shape the world. If we shift our view from the geological body of the mountain to the human stories that have unfolded in its shadow, we discover another layer of truth. Mountains are not only archives of the planet's past, they are also architects of civilization. They have shaped trade routes, guided migration, defined borders, and inspired myths. They have been both barriers and bridges, protectors and challengers. To live with mountains is to live within their influence, whether we recognize it or not. One of the most direct ways mountains shape human life is through their control of water. Snow and ice that gather upon their peaks melt gradually, feeding rivers that run through valleys and plains. These rivers, in turn, sustain agriculture, settlements, and entire regions. The Himalayas, often called the third pole because of their vast reserves of ice, feed rivers like the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Mekong. More than 1 billion people depend upon these waters, which originate in the silence of high-altitude glaciers. Without mountains, many of the world's most fertile lands would be deserts. The giant provides by melting slowly, like a patient hand pouring water into the basin of life. Mountains also offer protection. In history, they have been natural fortresses, shielding cultures from invasion or isolating them long enough to develop unique traditions. The Alps sheltered communities in Europe. The Andes shielded the Inca from encroachment for centuries. The mountains of Japan provided natural boundaries that allowed distinct cultural evolution. Where giants stand, they create both safety and separation. Yet mountains are not only walls, they are also gateways. Passes carved by glaciers or rivers have long served as corridors for exchange. The Silk Road wound through the Pamirs and the Tian, linking east and west. Traders carried silk, spices, glass, and ideas through valleys framed by peaks. In this way, mountains became meeting places where cultures mixed and knowledge traveled. Giants, though immense, allowed small paths through their bodies. Along these paths, civilizations grew interconnected. Trade routes through mountains were never easy. They demanded courage, endurance, and patience. Caravans faced avalanches, storms, and treacherous cliffs. But these challenges also fostered resilience and ingenuity. The need to navigate giants shaped technologies of travel, from mountain roads to suspension bridges to tunnels. In adapting to mountains, civilizations discovered new ways of being. Mountains have also influenced agriculture. Terraces carved into slopes, as seen in the Andes and parts of Asia, allowed farming on land that would otherwise be too steep. These terraces not only made food production possible, but also transformed entire landscapes into human-shaped mosaics. Seen from afar, they appear like the careful lines upon a giant's robe, marks of cooperation between people and stone. Culture itself grows differently in the presence of mountains. Myths, songs, and rituals often arise in recognition of their grandeur. In Greece, Mount Olympus became home of the gods. In Japan, Mount Fuji remains a sacred peak, inspiring poets and pilgrims alike. In the Andes, mountains are called apis, spiritual beings who watch over communities. Such beliefs are not accidental. They are born of the awareness that mountains hold power beyond comprehension. Whether we call them gods, spirits, or guardians, we acknowledge their role as forces greater than ourselves. Art, too, carries the imprint of giants. Painters have long sought to capture the sublime power of peaks, from Chinese ink scrolls depicting mist-covered mountains to European romantic landscapes filled with dramatic cliffs. Music and poetry echo with mountain imagery, using their height and silence as metaphors for transcendence, longing, or isolation. Even language bears the trace. We speak of mountainous tasks, of moving mountains, of summits as symbols of achievement. The giant shapes not only the land, but also the metaphors by which we understand our lives. Religions have often chosen mountains as sites of revelation. Moses climbed Sinai. The Buddha meditated in Himalayan caves. Pilgrims ascend peaks in many traditions, believing that elevation brings closeness to the divine. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea persists. To climb a mountain is to approach the sacred. The silence and scale of giants provide a setting where the mind opens, distractions fade, and something beyond the ordinary may be felt. Mountains have also been markers of identity. Nations, tribes, and families often define themselves by the ranges they inhabit. The Swiss speak of the Alps as part of their character. The Nepalese carry the Himalayas in their sense of place. Indigenous peoples in North America regard ranges like the Rockies and the Cascades as ancestral homes. To belong to a land with mountains is to carry their silhouette in memory. Giants become part of who we are, but mountains also remind us of limitation. Their barriers prevent easy conquest. Armies throughout history have struggled with passes, snow, and altitude. Hannibal's march across the Alps remains legendary precisely because it was so improbable. The same giants that give water and shelter also resist domination. They do not yield easily to human ambition. This resistance has preserved diversity. Communities separated by peaks often developed distinct languages, traditions, and ways of life. The giant's body acted as a boundary, not only physical but cultural. There is a paradox here. Mountains protect and isolate. They sustain and challenge. They invite reverence and demand caution. This paradox has shaped human imagination for as long as we have told stories. The giant, in its immensity, embodies contradictions. It is giver and withholder, path and barrier, guardian and adversary. Modern times have not erased this influence. Engineers now tunnel through mountains, build roads across them, or lay railways over their heights. Airplanes fly above them with ease. Yet even now, mountains resist full mastery. Landslides block highways. Avalanche sweep across ski resorts. Earthquakes remind us of their restless foundations. Giants may be traversed, but they are not conquered. Tourism has brought millions to their slopes, seeking beauty, challenge, or escape. Climbers dream of Everest, hikers of the Alps, pilgrims of Fuji. Entire economies now rely on the allure of peaks. Yet even in recreation, the mountain holds authority. Weather changes without warning. Altitude sickness humbles the strongest. The summit is never guaranteed. The giant permits or denies at will. Climate change has brought new awareness of how dependent we remain on mountains. Glaciers retreat, rivers shift, and communities downstream face uncertainty. What once seemed eternal now reveals fragility. Mountains, though immense, are vulnerable to human influence. The giant shows its wounds, reminding us that even stone is not immune to change. In literature and thought, mountains continue to inspire reflection. Writers use their imagery to speak of endurance, isolation, or aspiration. Scientists see in them laboratories of climate and geology. Artists turn their silhouettes into symbols of longing. Even in modern life, surrounded by technology, mountains retain their authority. They remain giants not only in stone but in imagination. If we pause to reflect, we see how deeply they have shaped us. Without their rivers, civilizations would not have thrived. Without their passes, cultures might never have mingled. Without their myths, our imaginations would lack some of their most enduring symbols. Mountains are not mere backdrops to human history. They are participants, co-authors of the story. The relationship is reciprocal. We carve terraces, paint scrolls, build temples, and tell tales. The giant responds with water, shelter, challenge, and inspiration. Over time, this dialogue shapes both land and people. Mountains are not passive scenery. They are partners in the making of human civilization. Perhaps this is why we continue to feel awe in their presence. It is not only their height or silence, it is the recognition that we have always lived with them, that our stories are bound to theirs. We are, in a sense, children of giants, shaped by their gifts and their refusals alike. To see mountains this way is to recognize the intimacy of the relationship. Giants are not distant beings, separate from our world. They are woven into the fabric of our lives, our cultures, our imaginations. They are not only guardians of stone, but companions in history. And so, when we look at a range silhouetted against the horizon, we are not merely seeing geology. We are seeing a presence that has shaped rivers, guided travelers, sheltered communities, inspired myths, and taught patience. We are seeing a giant who has lived alongside us, quietly influencing every chapter of our story. The giant's influence extends beyond rock. It lives in us. Even as we admire mountains for the stories they carry, we must remember that they are not static monuments. They are ever-changing, dynamic participants in the long unfolding of Earth's history. Giants are never finished. They rise, fall, and reshape themselves over timescales that challenge human imagination. To look at a mountain is to glimpse both permanence and transformation simultaneously. Consider erosion, the slow but relentless sculptor. Rainwater seeps into cracks, freezing and thawing in cycles that fracture rock. Wine sculpts cliffs and valleys over centuries. Glaciers grind stone with immense weight, carving deep troughs that will endure for millennia. Even when a peak seems eternal, it is slowly being rewritten by the elements. Giants endure, but they also yield. Their faces change, peaks shrink, ridges crumble. The seemingly immutable becomes ephemeral under the patient hand of time. Yet erosion is not merely destruction, it is renewal. Rock broken down by glaciers or rivers becomes soil, feeding forests, grasslands, and the foundations of human settlements. Landslides create fertile valleys where civilizations can flourish. The mountains decay. In other words, supports life, even as it transforms its own form. Giants sustain the world by giving of themselves, slowly, continuously, invisibly. Plate tectonics adds another dimension to this story. Mountains do not merely erode, they rise again. Colliding plates thrust layers skyward. Ancient seabeds become peaks, Entire ranges fold and buckle. In the Andes, the ongoing collision of the Nazca and South American plates lifts peaks higher, even as wind and ice wear them down. Giants are simultaneously creators and destroyers, rising and yielding in an endless rhythm that has repeated for hundreds of millions of years. Volcanic mountains, too, illustrate the duality of creation and destruction. Stratovolcanoes build themselves layer by layer, eruption by eruption, while simultaneously threatening life in their shadows. Lava flows destroy forests, yet call to create fertile soils. Ash clouds blanket valleys, only to enrich them for decades. In these processes, the giant is both threatening and nurturing, terrifying and sustaining. Every eruption is a reminder of scale and impermanence, of power exercised over times far longer than human attention spans. Even the slowest processes, like the rise of folded mountains, carry drama within them. Strata that took millions of years to accumulate can be thrust tens of thousands of meters upward in seemingly sudden bursts along fault lines. Earthquakes release energy stored over eons. From a human perspective, this is catastrophe. From the mountain's perspective, it is part of the process of self-realization. The giant grows not as we understand growth, but as the earth itself intends. And yet mountains retain memory through all these cycles. Fossils embedded in their layers persist even as peaks rise or fall. Sedimentary deposits from ancient seas are visible at summits. Traces of glacial action, volcanic eruptions, and landslides remain etched in stone. The giant is not a blank slate, but a palimpsest. Each event adds to the narrative, never erasing what came before, but layering it with new chapters. The scale of these processes is humbling. Entire ranges are lifted, sculpted, and worn down over tens of millions of years. Human history, which seems vast in our perception, is barely a moment in comparison. A mountain that today shelters a village has witnessed the rise and fall of species, the drift of continents, and the ebb and flow of ice ages. Giants see not years or decades, but eons. They measure time in processes that outlast civilizations. And yet, despite this immense scale, mountains remain intimate. They shape local climates, channel rivers, provide habitats, and offer routes for human passage. A single ridge may shelter rare species, a valley may collect water for a village. The giant's influence is both global and local, spanning eons and touching individual lives simultaneously. The mountain's presence is thus both awe-inspiring and practical. Cultural memory continues to reflect this awareness. Many communities understand mountains as forces that endure and change slowly, shaping not only the land, but the rhythm of life. Rituals aligned with seasonal shifts on peaks. Folklore teaches respect for avalanches, rockfalls, and floods. Even in a modern context, these lessons remain relevant. Giants, though ancient, continue to guide human understanding of risk, resilience, and adaptation. Climate records preserved in mountains also speak to the cycles of the past and the future. Ice cores hold information on atmospheric composition, temperature shifts, and past storms. Tree rings along mountain slopes reveal patterns of drought and abundance. By reading these natural archives, scientists glimpse not only what has been, but what may come. The giant becomes a teacher, offering insight into how Earth's systems respond to change. Mountains also embody continuity. While the world around them may transform, they remain as landmarks across generations. They define horizons, guide travelers, and inspire wonder. In art, literature, and music, they appear again and again, remind us that even as civilizations rise and fall, some presences persist. Giants endure, not by resisting time entirely, but by carrying the weight of history in their bodies. And in this endurance, there is hope. Mountains show that change and stability coexist. They demonstrate resilience in the face of erosion, earthquakes, and climate shifts. They teach that strength is not about rigidity, but adaptability. The giant bends, folds, and rebuilds, surviving through cycles of destruction and creation. By studying mountains, we learn not only about geology, but about persistence and patience in our own lives. In contemplating mountains as giants, we also see the deep interconnection of all things. Rivers, glaciers, forests, and humans are influenced by their presence. Life flourishes because of the water they provide. Communities thrive because of the protection and resources they offer. Knowledge and culture evolve because paths through their passes allow exchange. Giants are not isolated. They are nodes in a vast network, linking the physical, biological, and human worlds. Even as technology advances, mountains retain their authority. Satellites measure their height and movement, scientists drill cores to probe their history, and climbers attempt to sense previously deemed impossible. Yet despite these human efforts to master or measure them, mountains remain beyond full comprehension. Their processes are too vast, their scales too immense, and their histories too deep. Giants cannot be owned, only understood in part, and perhaps that is the most profound lesson. Mountains remind us that life, time, and Earth itself operate on scales far beyond our daily perception. They teach humility, patience, endurance, and respect. To imagine them as giants is not to romanticize, but to acknowledge reality, that Earth holds forces and processes far larger than ourselves, and yet intimately tied to our existence. The mountain story, like the giants, is ongoing. Peaks rise and fall, glaciers advance and retreat, rivers carve and recede. Life flourishes on slopes and valleys, human and non-human alike. Every change is recorded in rock, ice, and sediment. The giant remembers, the giant teaches, and we, as observers, are invited to listen, to learn, and to carry these lessons forward. As we reflect on this, we begin to see the continuity of existence. Mountains are both ancient and active. Their history informs our present. Their present shapes our lives. And in the silence of their vastness, we recognize our own transience and our connection to something greater. Giants endure because they are patient, resilient, and deeply woven into the fabric of Earth itself. To stand before a mountain is to feel both awe and grounding. It is to understand that time stretches beyond human comprehension. It is to witness the dance of creation and erosion, of endurance and adaptation. And perhaps most importantly, it is to recognize that we are participants in a story far larger than ourselves. The giant continues, silently, patiently, eternally, reminding us that every rock, river, and glacier is part of a story older than human memory. To read that story, we must listen with care, observe with patience, and remember that the scale of time is vast, and the presence of the earth is enduring. As we reach the culmination of our reflection on mountains, it is worth pausing to consider their lessons in the context of our own lives. Mountains have endured through eons, witnessed the rise and fall of species, the shifting of continents, and the evolution of civilizations. Yet they do so without haste or complaint. They teach us that permanence and change coexist, that strength is measured in patience, and that wisdom often resides in silence. When a river originates high in the mountains and flows into a distant valley, it carries with it the essence of peaks that have stood for millions of years. The water nourishes fields, forests, and cities. It travels through ecosystems, supporting countless lives. In this sense, the mountains are not isolated giants. They are central figures in a network of life, their influence extending far beyond their physical presence. Their patient shaping of rivers, valleys, and soil exemplifies endurance and generosity, qualities that resonate with our desire for legacy and purpose. Looking at the peaks, we also see humility reflected back. No matter how advanced our technologies or expansive our ambitions, human achievements are momentary shadows against the scale of geological time. Empires crumble, buildings decay, and even the most meticulously preserved artifacts erode, while the mountain endures. This perspective is not meant to diminish our efforts, but rather to situate them within a larger continuum. We become participants, not rulers, in the long unfolding of Earth's story. The symbolism of mountains carries into human imagination as well. Poets and painters, philosophers and travelers have long sought to capture their majesty. Mountains inspire introspection, offering a mirror for our own strengths and limitations. The giant does not judge or direct, it invites observation and reflection. In that invitation, we find a quiet encouragement to consider our choices, our patience, and our place within the wider world. Mountains are teachers of balance. Their peaks and valleys remind us that elevation and depression, success and failure, growth and decline are natural states. Just as a glacier carves a canyon over millennia, our lives are shaped incrementally through choices, challenges, and moments of stillness. Giants demonstrate that slow, deliberate processes can produce enduring impact. We learn that small, consistent efforts, when aligned with the natural flow of time, accumulate into profound change. Silence is another lesson. In their presence, noise falls away. We hear the wind across rock, the distant rush of water, and perhaps our own heartbeat. This quiet teaches attentiveness, an awareness of the world in its subtle details. It reminds us that reflection and patience often yield more insight than haste or distraction. The giant speaks not with words, but with presence, and listening becomes a form of learning. Mountains also reveal the interconnectedness of life. Their peaks capture clouds, feeding rivers that nourish distant plains. Their slopes provide habitats for flora and fauna adapted to extreme conditions. Human communities have learned to coexist with these ecosystems, recognizing the balance required to thrive. By observing how mountains sustain life while continually reshaping themselves, we gain insight into the intricate web of relationships that define the planet. Giants, though seemingly immovable, are integral to the cycles that sustain all life. Throughout history, mountains have influenced culture, art, and spirituality. Pilgrimages, rituals, and myths are intertwined with their presence. Societies have developed resilience and creativity in response to the challenges they pose. Roads, bridges, and tunnels demonstrate human ingenuity, while cautionary tales of avalanches and rockslides remind us of limits. In every instance, the mountain serves as both guide and measure, shaping not only the land, but the people who inhabit it. As we contemplate mountains in this holistic way, we begin to see them not as distant objects, but as companions in the story of life. They have witnessed the passage of species, the ebb and flow of civilizations, and the quiet evolution of ecosystems. Their lessons persist because their processes are ongoing. Giants teach patience, humility, resilience, and awareness. They embody endurance, yet their forms are continually renewed, demonstrating that stability and change are inseparable. Looking to the future, mountains remain vital. Climate change, human activity, and environmental shifts pose new challenges. Glaciers retreat, forests are altered, and rivers fluctuate in response. The giants are not immune to the consequences of human actions. They continue to respond, quietly, through natural processes that we may not immediately perceive. By observing and understanding these changes, we are reminded that our stewardship of the planet matters. The giants' lessons are as urgent as they are timeless. Even as we study mountains scientifically, measuring their height, monitoring seismic activity, and tracking ecological shifts, their larger message persists. Numbers and data provide understanding, yet they do not capture the full essence of the experience. To truly comprehend mountains, we must also engage emotionally, imaginatively, and contemplatively. The giant demands attention in ways that transcend utility or measurement. Presence, reflection, and care become forms of dialogue with the enduring force of nature. In this awareness, we also recognize our own transience. Human life, while vibrant and meaningful, is brief compared to the slow unfolding of peaks and valleys, yet our brief presence does not render us insignificant. Just as small rivers eventually carve canyons, human actions leave imprints, both visible and subtle, upon the earth. We are participants in a story much larger than ourselves, capable of influencing the environment while learning from its processes. Giants teach that our place is both temporary and interconnected. And so, as we conclude this reflection on mountains, we are invited to carry their lessons forward. Patience, humility, resilience, and attentiveness become not abstract ideals, but practical guides for living. By observing the giant, we learn to move with care, to act with foresight, and to respect the rhythms that shape life on Earth. We are reminded that endurance is not achieved through haste or force, but through alignment with natural processes and the acceptance of time scale. The mountain's presence offers a quiet assurance. Its peaks endure, its valleys support life, its rivers carry sustenance far from their source. In the stillness of stone, we find lessons that outlast centuries and civilizations. The giant's wisdom is not imposed, but offered freely, waiting for those willing to see, to listen, and to learn. As the sun sets behind the ridges, casting long shadows across valleys and peaks, we may feel a sense of connection. We belong to the world as much as it belongs to us. We are travelers in the giant's domain, yet not separate from it. Our stories unfold alongside its history. Our choices ripple across the same rivers, forests, and slopes shaped by eons of patience. And here, at the edge of reflection, we offer a gentle invitation. If this exploration of mountains, giants, and the long rhythms of Earth has resonated with you, take a moment to breathe, to look around, and to appreciate the enduring forces that shape our world. Perhaps you will find a peak to visit, a valley to wander, or a river to follow. Perhaps you will carry these lessons into your daily life, quietly, without fanfare. This is the gift of giants, presence, patience, and perspective. Thank you for joining this journey. Thank you for listening to the mountains speak in their slow, patient voice. May the lessons of giants linger with you as you move through your own world, and may the calm and perspective of stone and sky guide you toward understanding, wonder, and care for the earth. Good night.